So good morning, everybody. Now today of my presentation is spinal injury and the principle of spinal cord injury. And if you have any questions, please drop in the chat box so that I can explain you at the end of the session. Okay, talking about the principle of spinal injury, first you should know the anatomy of spine as a whole, the vertebrae and the content like its spinal cord. You should know about that. Okay, so basically spinal injury occur because either of the fracture or dislocation or either fracture and dislocation. Okay, and the most common site for the spine injury is thoracolumbar junction. It's from T10 to L2. That is called the thoracolumbar junction, where the lower half of the thoracic vertebra and upper 2-3 vertebra of the lumbar vertebra forms a thoracolumbar junction, and this is the most common vulnerable site for the spinal injuries because the thoracic spine is kyphotic and the lumbar spine is lordotic. So there is sudden change in the curvature of the spine, and that's why it is more prone for the fracture. And another reason being the thoracic is steep and the lumbar vertebra is mobile. That's why it is more common for the fracture. When you deal with the spinal injury, basically you have to deal with the neurological features, because once there is a spinal injuries, most of the time the patient presented with a neurological deficit, either in the form of paraplegia or quadriplegia. Paraplegia means the weakness or unable to move lower limbs. Both lower limbs is paraplegia, and quadriplegia means there is loss of power in both upper limbs and lower limbs. That is quadriplegia. So coming to the anatomy of the vertebral column, it's basically the bone is divided into axial and appendicular. So the vertebra comes under axial skeleton, whereas the upper limb and lower limb come under the appendicular. Okay, basically the vertebra consists of 26 bones. Means the sacrum and coccyx are fused. That's why it's taken as 2 bones. Otherwise, the cervical vertebra consists of 7 cervical vertebra, 12 thoracic vertebra, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 4 coccyx, that is fused. Okay. The same thing, the cervical consists of C1 to C7, thoracic from 1 to 12, lumbar 1 to 5, and sacrum from S1 to S5, which is fused, and coccyx also contains of 4 bones, which is also fused. Total, it forms around 7, 12, 17, 5, 22, 5, 27, and 4, 31 vertebrae. Coming to the curvature of the spine, basically the cervical spine and lumbar spine is lordotic, whereas the thoracic spine and sacral spines are kyphotic. Okay, and these thoracic spine and sacral spines are primarily curved that forms during the developmental period, whereas the cervical and lumbar curves are secondary curves, which is formed after the birth of the child. So thoracic and sacral curvature is formed in the intrauterine period, whereas the cervical and lumbar spine are formed after the development, after the birth of the baby. So overall, if you look at the curvature of the spine, it is generally as-shaped. So this is the picture showing the curvature of the spine, where you could see the cervical is lordotic, thoracic is kyphotic, and again lumbar is lordotic and sacral is kyphotic. So basically the spine consists of the vertebrae, and in between the vertebrae there is a disc, okay, intervertebral disc, and and all the soft tissues around the vertebra, like the anterior longitudinal ligament, posterior longitudinal ligament, ligamentum flavum, and the two vertebrae. In the posterior part, there is a connection between the two vertebrae with the ligament like interspinous ligament, supraspinous ligament. These are all the structures of the vertebrae. Now, there is a concept given by the Dennis, three-column theory. So, Dennis said that the spine consists of three columns: the anterior column, middle column, and the posterior column. So, anterior column consists of anterior half of the vertebra, anterior half of the intervertebral discs, and anterior longitudinal ligament. Whereas the middle column consists of posterior half of the vertebra, posterior half of the discs, and posterior longitudinal ligament. And the posterior column consists of the posterior structures like the lamina, pedicle, transverse process, spinous process, and all the ligaments like supraspinous ligaments, interspinous ligaments, all ligaments, and the facet joint, all these form the posterior column. Okay, basically the vertebra consists of this is the anterior part and this is the posterior part. The anterior part consists of this is whole is the vertebral body, and here this one is the pedicle. Okay, and this one is the lamina. Okay, and this one is the transverse process. On either side there is transverse process, and this last part is the spinous process. Okay, so the Dennis gives the column concept like anterior. This one is anterior column, middle column, and rest of the thing is the posterior column. The anterior column consists of anteriorly there is a in front of the vertebra there is an anterior longitudinal ligament, anterior half of the vertebra, and in between the vertebra, this is one vertebra. Suppose there is another vertebra below down. So in between the two vertebra there is a disc, intervertebral disc. So anterior half of the intervertebral disc, this is anterior column. Middle column consists of the posterior half of the vertebral body. Posterior, there is posterior longitudinal ligament just behind the vertebral body, and the intervertebral disc, posterior half the intervertebral disc, and the base of the disc, all this structure is the posterior structures or column. So when there is a spine fracture, according to the Dennis, if out of three column, if any two column involved, then it is called unstable fractures. If only one column is involved, then it is called stable fracture. Suppose there is only fracture of the anterior column. Suppose the anterior half of the body is fractured, that is stable fracture. That for that you don't have to do any operation. Suppose if both the anterior column and middle column is involved, then it is unstable. That should be fixed. Okay, that should we should do operation. If middle column and posterior column are involved, then again it is unstable fracture, so you have to go for operative intervention. So it's the same thing. If middle column plus either anterior column or posterior column is involved, it is unstable, so you have to go for operative fixation. If only posterior column is involved, you can manage conservatively. If only anterior column involved, you can manage conservatively. But if any two column involved, then you have to go for operative fixation. So sometimes, along with the vertebra, there is a rupture of the interspinous ligament or the supraspinal ligament. There is a gap between the two spinous process, and then it also indirect evidence of unstable fracture. So to see the ligaments around the vertebra, you should go for MRI. So for bony part involvement, you could do either X-ray or CT scan. So on the basis of mechanism of injury of the spine, this can be either flexion type of injury, flexion rotation type of injury, vertebral compression fractures, extension injury, flexion distraction type of injury. Okay, these are all the fracture in relation to the mechanism of injury. So basically, in flexion type of injury is most common type of spine injury, which is the commonest one and is a stable one. And most of these type of injury can be managed with conservative in the form of application of like Knight Taylor brace or different type of brace. Okay. The flexion rotation type of injury are highly unstable. You have to go for fixation in the form of either basically thoracolumbar injury operatively managed with the instrument pedicle screw fixations. Okay, and for cervical you can go either for anterior approach with the plate and posterior approach with the screw, either lateral mass screw or pedicle screw. Vertical compression type of fracture, if there is a vertical compression type of fracture in the form of mechanism of injury, then it could be either burst fracture. Then if the burst fracture in the cervical region or other thoracolumbar regions, basically burst fracture are unstable type of fracture. Even then burst fracture, it is, there are two types, stable burst and unstable burst. So for unstable type of burst, you have to go for operative fixation. The basic concept is if the fracture is unstable, you have to go for operative fixation. If the fracture is stable, then you can manage conservatively. So other mechanism of injuries like direct injuries in the form of bullet injuries or sudden, sometimes there is a violent muscle contraction also lead to the fracture of the vertebrae. So after the spinal cord, spinal injury, you should know most of the time there is a neurological deficit. So you should know the level of the neurological deficit, whether it is a complete spinal cord injury or incomplete spinal cord injury. So you should label it. Okay. So you should know the neurological level. What is neurological? The neurological level is defined as the most lowest segment with the normal motor and sensory function. Suppose there is a fracture of T10, okay, thoracic 10th vertebral fracture. If there is a 10th thoracic fracture, then you should look below the vertebral fractures. So when there is a complete function of the motor and sensory is present, that is the lowest level. Suppose if there is incomplete motor activity at the L5 level, then you could not consider as the lowest neurological level. For the lowest neurological level, there should be complete motor and sensory level. That is the lowest level of spinal cord injury. Okay, now another is how to determine the level of injury of the spinal cord injury. You know, the vertebra in the spinal cord, the vertebra consists of 33 vertebrae. Okay, but the spinal cord level is at the level of lower border of L1 or upper level of L2. Then comes all the cauda equina are from L2, there is no spinal cord. Okay, so the spinal cord level is way above the vertebra. That's why there is a discrepancy between the spinal cord level and the vertebral level. Okay, that's why if there is a fracture of the from C2 to C7, the neurological spinal cord level of involvement you could add 1. Okay, that means if there is a fracture of C7 vertebra, the level of injury could be C7 plus you should add 1, that is T1 level. Okay, if the fracture is between T1 to T6 level, you have to add 2 to find the spinal cord level, neurological level. That is, if there is a fracture of T6 vertebrae, then the level of lesion could be T6 plus 2, that means 8. That the neurological level should be T8. Okay, like that from T7 to T9 you have to add 3. From if there is a fracture of T10, then the neurological level should be at L1 and L2 level. If the fracture of T11, L3, L4 level. If there is a fracture of L1 vertebrae, then the segment should be sacrococcygeal segment. Okay, you should know this is most important slide. Now, once there is a spinal cord injury, either it will be a complete spinal cord injury or incomplete spinal cord injury. The incomplete spinal cord injury, suppose there is a fracture of L2 with a complete spinal cord injury, then below the level of that, there is a total paralysis of the limb. Okay, the power of the lower limb is 0/5. Sensor is, there is no sensation below the level of lesions. That is complete. And another is the incomplete. Suppose the power is, if the power is 5/5, or if the power is 2/5 and the sensor is present, that is incomplete. So for complete injury, there should be complete paralysis as well as loss of sensation and motor. For incomplete, it could be either in the form of anterior cord syndrome, posterior cord syndrome, central cord syndrome, Brown-Sequard syndrome, and CORDA. These are the subtype of incomplete lesions. So let's talk about the anterior cord syndrome. In anterior, for knowing this type of syndrome, you should know the track. Anterior, like corticospinal tract, spinothalamic tract, which are the ascending track and which are the descending track. If you know the track, then you can easily identify the incomplete lesions or complete lesion, what type of lesion. If there is a lesion in the anterior spinal cord, what type of lesion you could see, what are the features you could see. Okay, if there is a lesion in the anterior part of the spinal cord, then whatever, there is a loss of motor, pain and temperature, whereas all the proprioception and deep toes are preserved. Another is the Brown-Sequard. This is hemi-transection of the spinal cord. One half of the spinal cord is transected. Then the patient may present it with the loss of ipsilateral motor and proprioception, whereas loss of contralateral pain and temperature. This all feature is because of the tract involved, whether the spinothalamic tract involved or posterior column involved or anterior corticospinal tract involved. This depends upon the level of the lesion. In central cord syndrome, you could find the weakness, that is the upper is there is the upper limb weakness is more than the lower limb. Okay, in central cord syndrome, and there is a variable sensory loss in the different part of the body. Okay, and basically the sacral, there is sacral experiment, the sacral area, perianal area, the sensation is present. Coming to the pathophysiology of the spinal cord injury, basically the primary neurological damage is because of the direct trauma, hematoma, in the form of hematoma. If it is present within 4 hours, there is the infraction of the white matter occurs, and if it is present in the 8 hours, the infraction of the gray matter, and there is irreversible paralysis of the muscles. Okay. And secondary damage is because of either in the form of hypoxia, hypoperfusion, neurogenic shock, or spinal shock. So what is you should always differentiate between the neurogenic shock and the spinal shock. Okay, what is neurogenic shock? It means if the fracture is above the D6 or T6, you can call it either dorsal vertebrae or thoracic vertebrae. If for a neurological shock, the fracture should be above T6. That means from T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, T6. Not below T6. Generally, it is above T6. If there is a fracture, then you could see the features like the neurological shock in the spinal cord injury. And it takes from minutes to hours, because there is a fall of all the catecholamines, and it takes around 24 hours. So there is disruption in neurogenic shock. There is all disruption of the sympathetic outflow from D1 to L2, and these are all the features of the neurogenic shock. There is on-apose. If see the other injuries, major injuries, that may lead to the hypotension along with the spinal fracture. Now, talking about the spinal shock. The spinal shock, basically there is a transient physiological loss of all the autonomic functions, leading to the complete flaccid paralysis of the lower limb. Okay, and there is no power of the muscle, there is no sensation, and all are gone, and that is the spinal shock. And in the period of spinal shock, you cannot grade it as the complete neurological damage. Okay, complete spinal cord injury. Once the spinal shock period is over, then only you can grade it at whether it's a complete injury or incomplete injury. Okay, so in the spinal shock, there is loss of the anal tone. All the reflexes like knee reflexes, ankle reflexes are lost. all the autonomic control are lost, and generally this spinal shock will be recovered within 24 to 72 hours. Okay, once the spinal shock period is over, then you could classify whether it is a complete spinal cord injury or incomplete spinal cord injury. Generally, the spinal shock period comes between 24 to 70 hours, but in some cases it may take even more days, 7 days, even months. It takes months. So, while managing the spinal cord injury, you should do all the basic cardiac, life support and advanced cardiac life support you should do, and you should follow all the ABCD protocol in the emergency. Like log roll technique, you should know. While if you suspect the spinal cord injury, then always transport the patient in the log roll technique, and always look for the markers of the spinal injuries. And once you do primary survey, then you go for a secondary survey from 8 to 2 examinations, and always do adequate X-ray from from cervical to coccyx, part by part, cervical spine, thoracic spine, lumbar spine. You should do adequate X-ray, and you should always treat the patient in the emergency ward. And once the patient is stable, then send the patient to the ward, or even if the patient deteriorates, you have to send the patient to the ICU. So the final is and once emergency management done, you have to go for the definitive treatment in the form of conservative or operative. And once this is done, and then last one is the rehab protocol. So so you should always diagnose the spinal cord injury in the total form. Like you should not miss whether it's a complete injury or incomplete injuries. So you have to evaluate the patient right from the emergency and do all the necessary investigation. Even sometimes you have to do the CT scan and even MRI, so to look at the level of the lesions. Okay, always clinically you should judge the patient, you should evaluate the patient, always inspect from the occiput to coccyx, whether any tenderness in the mid plane of the spine. Always look for the gap, if there is a gap in the posterior aspect of the spine. Look for the edema and bruising, and if there is an associated muscle spasm, you should have to look all these things. So for neurological assessment, always check the sensory level, because there is always a sensory level for checking the spinal cord injury from C2 to S3. Okay, and once the sensation is examined, you go for the motor examination. And for motor exam, before doing the motor examination, you have to go for the tone of the particular joint, tone, reflex, and power. And at last, you should do the parietal examination, whether the patient is in spinal shock or not. You have to do rectal examination also. For the neurological and sensory examination, always grade from 0 to 2, 0, 1, 2. If the sensation is absent, you should label it as 0. If it is impaired, 1. If it is normal, it is 2. And for the neurological assessment, there is always there is a neurological level. So if the patient can able to flex the elbow, that is the flexion of the elbow is done by biceps. So its neurological level is C5. So if patient can able to flex the elbow, that means the C5 level is good. If the patient cannot able to flex the elbow, that means the bicep is not working. That means you should suspect there is injury in the C5 level. Likewise in the C6, nerve root supply the wrist extensor, C7 supply the elbow extensor, C8 supplies the finger flexors, T1 finger abductors, L2 hip flexor, L3 knee extensor, L4 ankle dorsiflexors, L5 long toe extensor, and S1 around the ankle, plantar flexors. So for assessing the motor power, always do the MRC grading. That is it starts from 0 to 5. If there is no power at all, that is total paralysis, you could grade it as a 0. If there is visible contraction or flickering movement, then the power is 1. If the patient can able to move the limb by eliminating the gravity, that is 2. If the patient can able to lift the limb against the gravity, it is 3. And if the patient can move the limb with some resistance, it is 4. And if the patient can move against full resistance, that is 5. So these are the grading of muscle power. Now neurological, another is the rectal examination, because you should, in a rectal examination, you should see the tone and sensation, tone of the rectal. The presence of the rectal tone in itself does not indicate any incomplete injury. Suppose how you check whether the patient is in spinal shock or not means, now you should keep one finger in the anal canal. So you should insert the anal, you do PR, anal canal, and then the another finger will pull the catheter. And if there is a contraction of the anal canal, then the neurological spinal shock period is over. If there is still tone is not present, then it is still the patient is in spinal shock. So that is the bulbocavernous reflex. That is, bulbocavernous reflex present means the presence of the reflex implies that the lack of the supraspinal input to the sacral flow outflow, and it is suggestive to the complete spinal cord injury. Suppose you put one finger in the anal canal and pull the catheter by the another hand, and if there is a contraction of the anal canal, that is the bulbocavernous reflex is present, means the spinal shock period is over. Now once the spinal shock period is over, then you could grade whether it's a complete injury or incomplete injury. So there are certain criteria, as a nexus criteria. That means this is the method of assessing the patient, whether the patient is in spinal injuries or not. Basically, in the cervical, the trauma patient, whether you need to do the X-ray or not. These are the criteria, nexus criteria. That means if the patient is stable and alert, if there is no focal neurological deficit, no altered level of consciousness, no intoxication, no midline tenderness, or no distracting symptoms, then you should not it is not necessary to do X-ray. But these criteria do not apply if the patient is more than 65 years old. This is whether you do X-ray or not. These are the criteria. But anyway, if the patient comes with a spinal injury, you have to do X-ray. So another rule, the Canadian C-SPAN rules, if the patient age is more than 65, if the mechanism is high velocity injuries or in presence of paresthesia, then you have to go for X-ray. Now, who are the low risk patient? Means simple rare motor vehicle collision, sitting position in the emergency department, ambulatory at times since injury, delayed onset of neck pain, absence of midline C-spine tenderness. If these features are present, the patient can rotate the neck up to 45 degrees, then you don't have to do X-ray. If above any of the features, plus if the patient cannot rotate the neck up to 45 degrees, then you have to go for X-ray. These are the things, whether you have to do X-ray or not. But the basic criteria is, if there is a spinal injury, better to do X-ray. Now, coming to the X-ray, basically you have to do all the standard X-ray in the form of like anterior posterior view, lateral view, and sometimes the special views like mouth open views or even oblique views you need to do. So, how to read the X-ray of the cervical spine? That means advocacy, alignment, bony abnormality, base of the skull, cartilage, contour, discs. You should all these check this feature. That means once you do cervical spine lateral view, then what are the things you should look? Whether there is a spinal injury or not. That means if you should look for 4 lines. One is the anterior vertebral line, just anterior to the vertebral line. You should see the anterior vertebral line, posterior vertebral line, and there is a junction between the spine, lamina and pedicle, spinolaminar line, and posterior one more line is the posterior spinous line. So these lines should be collinear. There should be no zigzag between this line. This should be straight. This you see in the same line. If there is just some displacement like this, if there is a zigzag in this line, that means you should suspect there is a fracture or subluxation or dislocation or any form of spinal cord injury. Now we see here the anterior spinal line. This one is gap between the this one C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C5 and C6. You see some displacement between C5 and C6. Otherwise, you see the anterior spinal line up to C5 is okay, and suddenly there is a change in curvature of the from C6. That means these are not in the same line. And if you look at the posterior spinal line, these are in the same. These are in the same line, but once you reach from C5 to C6, there is sudden change, and you go more posterior. That means there is subluxation between the C5 and C6. So basically, in a unilateral, if there is a fracture dislocation, like if the unilateral fracture dislocation there is less than 50%, that is unilateral fracture dislocation. If there is more displacement, more than 50% displacement, you should consider it as bilateral fracture dislocation. These are the indirect evidences. Basically, Atlanto occipital dissociation is very difficult to diagnose. So you have to use special type of X-ray, open mouth view, and you have to always measure the distance between from the occiput to the atlas, and should not be exceed more than 5 mm. Always you have to, in open mouth view, there is a odontate process. So whether there is a fracture of odontate or not, you should do this type of X-ray. In anterior posterior view, it must include the spinous process of all the vertebra, okay, from C2 to T1 vertebra. These are the spinous process. In between, you see this one is the spinous process, okay. And these are the, at the end, these are the transverse process. So all the true anterior posterior view cervical spine consists from you should see the spinous process from C2 to T1. So open mouth view, basically to see whether there is a fracture of odontate process or dens. You should also call it a dens or odontate process. This is open mouth view. You see this one is the dens. Whether there is a fracture or not, you could see with this view. So another method of evaluation of the spinal cord injuries, you have to sometimes, many of times you have to go for not only X-ray, but you have to go a CT scan, and CT scan basically tells you whether you have to go for operative fixation or you can manage conservatively. You could see this is the axial cord of the spine, and this hole is the foramen where the spinal cord passes. But if there is a fracture, the body is totally fracture, that is broad fracture, and some piece is transverse posterior to the foramen and compressing the spinal cord. So this is burst type of fracture. And in X-ray, it is you cannot assess with this X-ray, so you have to go for CT scan. MRI, basically in MRI, you have to look for the soft tissue structures like whether there is a cord edema or not, whether there is a disc prolapse or not. You see here, this one is the posterior. There is a dislocation, subluxation between this vertebra and this vertebra, and leading to there is a compression of the spinal cord posteriorly. Okay, so this can be seen with the help of MRI. The patient who report transient neurological symptoms but who have a normal examiners should undergo an MRI assessment of their spinal cord. later on you can go for the MRI scan. So in cervical spine injury, the standard radiological examination of the cervical spine in unconscious or indicated patient is like lateral cervical film you can take, lateral view, anterior posterior cervical film, and CT scan of the occiput. Okay. सुरु अर्को जान्ने ला भयो okay. Now only there is few minutes left, so I can again continue the sessions once this is off. Okay. So spinal stabilization and management. Basically, management protocol, protect the spine at all times during the management of the spinal, because if there is a certain disruption in the spinal cord, then the patient may go into the paraplegia or quadriplegia. So you should handle the spine case very delicately. Okay. Up to the 5% of the spinal injury have a second or possibly not adjacent fracture elsewhere in the spine. So you should also look the other side. If there is a spine fracture, you have to look for the other side. There is up to 5% you could see the fracture in the other part of the body. So basically, ideally, the whole spine should be immobilized in the neutral position on the firm surface. So that's why while transporting the patient, you should use a board, spinal board. For cervical spine injury, basically, if there is cervical spine injury, you have to go for Philadelphia or semi-hard collar, cervical collar you should use, not the soft collar. Soft collar is basically used for like muscle spasm and mechanical neck pain. But if there is a fracture, you have to go for Philadelphia collar or semi-rigid collar. So always, if you are suspecting the cervical spine injury, so first and foremost, you do to protect the spine, cervical spine, in the form of application of the Philadelphia collar or semi-hard collar. So while if you suspect the neck is not in neutral position, then you should attempt to make neutral position. Okay. So if the patient is in awake and cooperative, encourage them to actively move their neck in the neutral position. These are the method of positioning of the cervical spine. So this, you see, these are anterior. This one is the anterior part, and this one is the posterior part. This is the Philadelphia collar. These are the things you should apply. This is continuation of the same presentation. Now, management of the spinal cord injuries. The first, you should treat the life-threatening conditions. So the transportation is the main important thing in spinal cord injury. How you transport determine the prognosis of the patient. Okay, that's why if cervical spine injury, always protect with the Philadelphia collar, and if you are suspecting the thoracolumbar injuries, always transport the patient in the dashboard. Okay, log roll technique. These are the things you should do. So these are the method how to apply the rigid cervical collar, log roll technique, rigid transmission board, rigid transfer slides. These are the things you should know. And for resuscitation, always do ATLS protocols and ABCD principle. Always airways, breathing, circulation, deformity, and examination, see extremity, you have to do in the sequential order. Okay, if the patient warm, and if the pressure, systolic pressure is less than 80 and the heart rate is less than 50, you have to stabilize the patient. Should give the fluids. Okay, so you can, if cervical spine is fracture, dislocation, or subluxation, you can manage in the OT conservatively with the help of different forms of traction. Okay, one is the Gardner-Wells traction, You can use supply. You should give the oxygen. Again, like if needed, you can give heparin and proton pump inhibitors, crystallers, atropine. Depending upon the situation, you can manage in the emergency department and in the ICU. They said steroid has a controversial role. They said the methylprednisolone can be given if the patient presented within 8 hours of the injury, but it is also still controversial. But if the patient presented with the in emergency department within 8 hours, we can give methylprednisolone bolus dose 30 mg per kg bolus and 5.4 mg per kg per hour infusion as a maintenance dose. Okay. If present within 3 hours, bolus dose is 30 mg per kg and maintenance dose is 5 mg per kg within 45 minutes over 23 hours. And if present within 8 hours, 4 mg per kg per hour for 47 hours. This is the algorithm for spinal cord immobilization method. The patient maintains decreased level of consciousness. If yes, immobilize. No, you don't have to. If there is a dog impairment or yes, then you have to immobilize. These are when to immobilize the patient. These are the things you should ask or you should know. Okay. So subjective assessment, go for cervical, thoracic, lumbar, spine. If there is a pain, you immobilize. If not, then not necessary. Okay. And even if there is a numbness, tingling, burning, weakness, sensation is present, you have to go for immobilization. Now, for objective assessment, for cervical, thoracic, lumbar deformity or tenderness, if present, you have to go for immobilization. Other severe injuries, if present, immobilize. If not, not necessary. Okay. Pain or cervical range of motion is decreased, then you have to go for immobilization. So basically, most of the time, it's you can manage the spine injury conservatively. But if there is a injury is severe, if there is like deformity is present and all the neurological features present, if there is a burst in unstable fracture, burst fracture, you have to go for fixation. So basically, indication for surgery is you could go for if there is a deformity present, you can go for corrective osteotomy and spinal fixation. If there is a fracture, you can stabilize with the help of pedicle screw. Okay, and if there is a spinal cord is compressed, you can go for decompression also. So depending upon the type of the fracture, you manage accordingly. So prognostic factors for recovery depends upon the patient with the complete cervical spine injury that remains complete within first 24 hours of the admission are unlikely to regain significant ambulatory function. Only 1 to 3% patient may go for ambulation. Otherwise, if there is complete spinal cord injury, patient will not regain the full function. Okay. And another condition, they said the cervical injury have the higher potential for recovery than the thoracic and thoracolumbar injuries. Younger the patient, better the outcome. Older the patient, worse is the outcome. Okay. Intramedullary hemorrhage signifies the worst neurological and functional. If there is an intramedullary hemorrhage, the prognosis is bad. So for operative fixation, there are various methods like Harrington's rod instrumentation, Lukey rod instrumentation, okay, Arshil rectangle fixation. Now this pedicle screw fixation is the latest technology we use. Like in our setup, we also do spine fixation with the technique of pedicle screw fixation. So we go from the you puncture the pedicle and put a pedicle screw. If necessary, go for decompression of the spinal cord. If not necessary, just put a pedicle screw and come out. So treatment plan, if there is injury and look for the neurological feature, If there is a neurological deficit, neurological deficit, stable spine, you should apply a night plus for 6 weeks, okay, and then mobilize after 6 weeks with the help of night base. The complete recovery within 3 months. If there is a unstable fracture, then you have to go for operative fixation. Injury, if there is injury with a neurological deficit, first rule out the whether patient is in spinal shock or not. Once the spinal shock period is over, and then you could classify whether it's a complete spinal cord injury or incomplete spinal injury, and you can go for MRI to look for the cord compression or disc prolapse or any soft tissue ligament injury, and then if the canal is not compromised, if there is a neurological deficit, you go for operative fixation. If canal is not compromised and no neurological deficit, if height is preserved more than 50%, then you can go for conservative management. If height, the vertical height is decreased more than 50%, neurological deficit, then you have to go for operative fixation. Thank you. Question, right?